Thank you for joining our review of the English Civil War. To understand the English system of government and parliament, we must go back to the Middle Ages. In 1066, the English crown was up for grabs. One of those who had a claim on the throne was William of Normandy in France. William and his army crossed the English Channel, and in 1066, he won the crown of England. From that point on, in English history, he is known as William the Conqueror. For us today, what's important about William is he brought with him a system of government in which he sought the advice from both nobles and churchmen before making any new laws. This became an important tradition in English government. In 1215, England saw the signing of possibly their most important legal document. It's the Magna Carta. King John was forced to sign it, and what the document says is that the king may not set taxes or collect taxes without the consent of his royal advisors, who go on to become the Parliament. So while English monarchs like Henry VIII and Elizabeth I were powerful rulers, they were not absolute monarchs in the true sense because they did not have the power of taxation. They were dependent on the Parliament for their funding. In the 1600s, Charles I becomes King of England. Charles is a strong believer in the divine right of kings. Charles I spends lavishly, constantly declaring war and losing, and spending like every day was a large party. He gets to the point where Parliament refuses to fund any more of his activities. Charles, desperate for money, turns to individuals and forces them to lend him money. If they object, he throws them in prison until the family coughs up the money. This struggle between the king and the parliament eventually leads to civil war between the supporters of the king and the supporters of parliament. The side supporting the king were known as the royalists. We also call them the cavaliers. They supported the king and included members of the Anglican Church, Roman Catholics, and the nobility. Those opposing the king and supporting parliament were known as the Roundheads because of their severe hairstyle. This included Puritans and other non-Anglican Church Protestants. One of the officers of Parliament's army is Oliver Cromwell, who shows an amazing ability to lead his men in combat. He eventually heads up the army that defeats the king, Charles I. Once he has captured the king, he abolishes the monarchy and the House of Lords and proclaims England to be a commonwealth or a republic. In other words, a government of the people rather than headed by a monarch. Once England declared it was no longer a monarchy, Charles I was placed on trial for treason against the people of England, found guilty, and beheaded. Oliver Cromwell now takes control of England, assuming the title of Lord Protector of England. He is in effect a military dictator. As Cromwell acts more and more like a dictator, members of Parliament begin opposing him. Unfortunately, while Parliament resented his power, Parliament didn't have an army. The army was loyal to Cromwell. As Cromwell starts acting more and more like a king and the opposition increased, Cromwell simply dissolves Parliament and rules alone. When Cromwell dies in 1658, he is replaced as Lord Protector of England by his son. Unfortunately, his son was a particularly weak ruler and quickly lost the support of Parliament and the army. In 1660, Parliament reached out to the son of the executed Charles I and invited him to return to England to become the king. The return of Charles II to become the King of England is known as the Restoration. England has restored her monarchy. One problem as Charles II ruled as King of England was Charles had no children. His younger brother James would be next in line to succeed him, but there was a problem. People suspected that James was secretly a Catholic. This debate of whether James should become the next King of England led to the development of political parties in England. On the side of those who believed that James had the right to become the king were the Tories. Opposing the Tories were the Whigs, who wanted a strong parliament and a Protestant king. James II does become king, and he's a strong believer in absolute rule. He has two daughters who are raised as Protestants, but then his wife dies, and when he remarries, he marries a Catholic princess. When they have a child, the concern is that that child, who would be the next King of England, would be secretly raised to be a Catholic. And Parliament was in no mood to have a Catholic return to the throne after the troubles and issues of Mary I. The Whigs and the Tories both called on James to step down as the King of England. They invited James's daughter Mary and her Dutch husband William of Orange to assume the throne. James does not want to give up power and refuses to resign. When William lands in England at the head of a Dutch army, James is forced to flee when the English army refuses to support him. William and Mary become the King and Queen of England in what is known as the Glorious Revolution. It's a glorious revolution because it was a change of king, hence the revolution, but it was glorious because there was no bloodshed involved. Again, William and Mary become King and Queen of England in the Glorious Revolution. Before William and Mary could rise to the throne, Parliament insisted that they sign a document known as the English Bill of Rights. In this English Bill of Rights, William and Mary agreed that Parliament chooses who the next ruler of the country is, not the king. In addition, William and Mary agreed that the monarch would be subject to parliamentary law. In other words, the king and queen were no longer above the law, or a law unto themselves. And finally, the English Bill of Rights laid out what the rights of private citizens were. Thank you for joining us as we reviewed the English Civil War and the Glorious Revolution.